Welcome to RPRA's EEE Producer Registration and Supply Reporting Requirements webinar. At this time, all lines are in a listen-only mode. To ask a question at any time during the presentation or for technical assistance, please type your question in the text box provided on the screen and press Enter. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. I will now turn the webinar over to Jess Turcat, Communications Advisor at RPRA.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Today's webinar is focused on registration and supply reporting requirements for producers of information technology, telecommunications, and audiovisual equipment, or ITTIAV. As Jenny mentioned, you can ask a question at any time throughout the presentation. Just use the text box on the right-hand side of your screen. There are two tabs at the top of the text box. We do ask that if you have any technical issues, sound, lagging, to type it into the tech support tab, and then Jenny will be able to assist you with any issues you're experiencing. Any general questions or comments you can put in the Q&A tab. There are a large number of people, or we are expecting a large number of attendees today, so we'll do our best to get to all questions, but if we can't for whatever reason or because of time, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. This is also if any kind of really super specific questions come up to your business and your business operations, it may be best to follow up with you directly offline. So please be sure that everyone will receive a response either during the webinar or after. We also will be posting a recording of the session as well as these presentation slides later today or tomorrow. So you will be able to view the slides or listen to the recording afterwards as well. So today we are doing something a little different. We're going to ask for your feedback in a poll towards the end of the presentation. This is just as a way we're looking to, continuously improve our webinars and our events, and your feedback is instrumental in improving these sessions. So we'll be asking you just a couple questions that'll take less than a minute. And you will see when we launch the polls, you will see a couple gray boxes pop up underneath your chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And each question you'll be multiple choice, and you'll select one option. And then once you select it, you will submit your selection. Again, that should take, maybe 30 seconds of your time. Again, just really looking for your feedback and input as we continue to improve these sessions going forward. So with that, I will hand it over to Pat Moran, our RPRA's registrar, who will be leading today's presentation. Pat?
Thank you very much, Jess, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second webinar on the electronics regulation. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what's changing, talk about what constitutes E, and then we're going to focus again on the producer requirements for ITT and AV, which is the first E requirement under the regulation that kicks in starting on January 1st of 2021. We're going to spend some time talking about registration and reporting, and then some time working with pros. All right, so what is changing? Well, a lot is changing, of course. On December 31st of this year, the end of this year, the current Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Program that has been operated by the Ontario Electronic Stewardship was going to come to an end. The Ontario Electronic Stewardship itself will be wound up completely and will no longer exist at some point in the course of next year once a liquidator has been appointed to shut that operation down completely. Starting on January 1st of 2021, a little over a month from now, producers of electrical and electronic equipment are going to be individually accountable and financially responsible for collecting and reusing, refurbishing, or recycling their products when consumers are finished with them. This new system is based on an extended producer responsibility framework where each individual producer's obligation is calculated based on what each individual producer markets into Ontario. It's based, of course, on the weight of what they market in, and the weight of what they market in is used to calculate how much they have to recover in the course of each performance year. RPRA, that's us. The authority is the regulator that's responsible for enforcing and implementing the new requirements under the EEE regulation, as well as under the tires regulation, which was released some time ago, and the batteries regulation that was issued earlier this year. So our role is basically we have been established under the statute, the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, as the regulatory body that is responsible for ensuring that obligated parties meet the registration and reporting requirements, to ensure that E continues to be collected throughout the province, ensuring that the management requirements for E are met, and a key part of our role is to establish and maintain an electronic registry, which is used for registration and reporting purposes. We also work with businesses to make sure that going into these new programs, as each new regulation comes out, that they understand the regulatory requirements in order to be able to comply with them. And of course, this webinar is an example of the various activities that we engage in to help people understand the new requirements. And ultimately, once people are registering and reporting, we oversee what people are doing, carry out inspections, and enforce compliance where necessary. We know from the programs that we've implemented already that a major priority issue for producers is is to ensure that there's a level playing field. They want to know that if each producer wants to know that if they're complying with the requirements, so is everybody else, so that nobody's getting an unfair advantage in the competitive marketplace for the products that are being reported. It's really important to understand that the authority is not a replacement for the Ontario Electronic Stewardship. Ontario Electronic Stewardship was responsible for delivering a program and basically was the entity that producers, stewards as they were called then, reported into how many units they were providing in Ontario, either directly or through remitters, and arranged for the necessary services that led to processing and recycling of used electronics. RPRA is a straight up regulator. We don't get involved in any of the processes that producers require to meet the obligations under the new regulation. Essentially, the Ontario Electronic Stewardship is being wound up and is being replaced with a marketplace of service providers that will compete to meet producer obligations. And this is a paradigm shift basically for the program. OAS was a centralized organization and took care of everything. In the new world, of course, OAS no longer exists, and there will be processors, producer responsibility organizations, and refurbishers all competing to meet the requirements of producers. So essentially competing for your business as a producer, as a service provider. So what is E under the new regulation? The starting point, of course, is the top level definition for E. It's any equipment that's designed for use with an electric current, has a voltage of less than 1,000 volts for alternating current and 1,500 volts for direct current, and doesn't weigh anything more than 250 kilograms per unit. It's not intended to be used as part of permanently as part of a building or structure. It includes all the components, the parts, peripherals, including batteries that are provided with the product at the time of supply to the consumer, but it doesn't include the packaging or the printed paper that comes with the product. So that's the top level definition, and then there are two categories set out in the regulation of obligated E. The first is the information technology, telecommunications, and audiovisual category, or ITT and AV. And the second category is lighting. So references to E throughout this presentation, is meant to refer to both ITT, AV, and lighting. And ultimately, there may be other categories added in the future, but right now the regulation addresses just those two categories. I'm not going to spend any time talking about lighting in this presentation, and the reason for that is that the registration for lighting producers and service providers doesn't happen until the end of 2022. And the first performance period for lighting doesn't begin until January 1st of 2023. We will, of course, provide more information through webinars like this closer to the time of initial registration and performance requirements for lighting producers. So today we're going to focus on ITT and AV. So I touched briefly on the top level definition for E. There's a specific definition then within that for ITT and AV. ITT and AV is any E that has as its primary purpose the purpose of collecting, storing, processing, presenting, or communicating information, including sounds and images, recording or reproducing sounds and images, and these are all products that weigh no more than 250 kilograms. The next couple of slides I'm going to go through will contain the types of products that are included or excluded from the regulation. Really important to note that this is not intended to represent a complete list of products that are obligated. The regulation sets up the definitions. There is a schedule to the regulation that provides some examples for the category, but that's not meant to be an exhaustive list either. We are in the process of developing a more detailed list in an upcoming compliance bulletin that we plan to release shortly, called What is ITT and AV? And that will be a living document that we will keep up to date. And again, that document isn't intended to be a comprehensive list either. The determining control for what's in and what's out is really the definitions in the regulation, and looking at the definition, does it have as its primary purpose the purpose of collecting, storing, processing, et cetera, et cetera. We know that for the vast majority of products that fall within the category of ITT and AV, that the process is pretty simple for anybody to determine if it's in or out based on the definition. But we also know that there are some products that are gray areas, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions about specific products that individual producers may have. So you should just give our compliance team a call at the number that's shown on your screen right now, or an email to registry@rpra.ca. All right, so what kinds of things are included? So Schedule 1 sets out a number of examples of what's included in the category of ITT and AV. As I said, this isn't intended to be an exhaustive list. It's just intended to provide some significant examples that will help guide your understanding of what falls within the definition. What's excluded? There are some express exclusions. So cash registers, self-checkout machines, and automated teller machines, or ATMs, things like street lights and signal or lighting systems, textiles, clothing, furniture, or other upholstered and stuffed articles containing E, motor vehicles, which have all sorts of E contained with them. Any product that is marine, military, or aeronautic or space equipment, or is designed for use with that kind of equipment. And then again, any E that falls within the definition of device in Section 2 of the Food and Drugs Act, Canada. So if you look at that definition, it defines device to include things like thermometers and other diagnostic devices that are electronic in nature, but are not intended to be covered by this regulation in this category of ITT and AV. Power tools are excluded, and so are children's toys. Just a note that the original proposed regulation that was issued in 2019, in May of 2019, proposed to include a category for large appliances and small appliances, but as you will have seen in the final regulation that was issued in November, these two categories have not been included and so are not obligated at this time. There were a number of products that are now obligated that were not previously accepted in the current OES program. So these are duly obligated. So things like modems and routers, set-top boxes, satellite equipment, telecom equipment, printer cartridges. And just while I'm on the printer cartridge, all that's required to be reported in terms of weight is the weight of the cartridge itself, excluding the weight of the toner or ink that may be contained in that printer cartridge. Musical instruments, audio recording equipment, duly obligated, industrial commercial equipment, amplifiers, speakers, microphones, and so on, e-readers, e-books, electronic calculators, dictionaries, video game consoles and controllers, and aftermarket vehicle ITT and AV equipment, and replacement parts, of course, and components for ITT and AV, including if these were supplied as part of a claim under a warranty. So these are all new products. Again, this is just evidence of the fact that the primary driver for what constitutes ITT and AV is the definition that's in the regulation, and as opposed to some comprehensive list that can be finalized. Electronics is a rapidly changing category of products that means that the definition is the best way to go to ensure that we're capturing as much as possible in the category of ITT and AV. Well, we've internally developed a bit of a process when we look at individual products to determine if it's in or out of the category of ITT and AV. And so I want to share sort of the questions that we ask and suggest that these are the questions that you as a producer should ask yourselves. So to help you determine if an ITT or AV product that you're supplying is obligated, just consider the following question. Just look at the definition. Is the primary purpose of the product for the collection, storing, processing, presenting, or communicating information, including sounds and images, recording or reproducing sounds and images? As I said earlier, 95% of the time, it's going to be pretty obvious whether the primary purpose of that product is or isn't for this purpose. If the answer is yes, and the product weighs no more than 250 kilograms and isn't otherwise exempted, then it's in. It's ITT and AV. Some additional questions to consider. Is the product listed as an example in Schedule 1? That makes it pretty easy. It's in. Is it similar in purpose to the examples that are listed in Schedule 1? That's a pretty good indication that it's probably in as well. Is the product listed in our upcoming compliance bulletin? Hopefully that will be of help to you as well. So if the answer is yes to these additional questions, then it's obligated. And as I said, if you're unsure that a particular product that you supply, whether it meets one of the exemptions under the regulation or whether it's obligated as ITT and AV, please contact the compliance team and they'll be happy to help you out. All right, so I'm going to stop there to take questions.
Great, thanks, Pat. We have a couple here. So this is specifically asking about if they're required to register on the type of E they supply. We will be getting into this more in the next section, but just thought I could ask it now. We are a wholesale and distribution company of printers, toners, cameras, and voice recorders and other electronic devices. Are we required to register under this regulation?
Yeah, so as you just indicated, Jess, we're going to be looking at who is a producer in the next section. So I think I'm hold off on this question until we get through who the producer is. And I think then I'll be able to answer it in context.
Great. This is a question here. So the previous slide indicated that cables are obligated. So the question is any cable that is sold separately from a product, is that obligated, i.e. power charging cables, etc.?
Yeah, so again, this goes back to the definition of what a product is under the Act itself. It's not repeated in the regulation, but of course, because it's in the Act itself, it does apply. A product means a thing, a part of a thing, or any combination of things intended to be used by a consumer. So cables that are shipped with a product or separately from a product, all obligated. It's all intended to be used by the consumer. So it's definitely in.
Okay. Another question here: are hospitals exempt from the regulation?
Yeah, so this is a question that we get frequently in different forms. The Act talks about products that are supplied to a consumer, and there's a tendency to think that a consumer is just an individual person, like a homeowner or whoever buying these things. But in fact, a consumer is anybody who buys or is supplied with a product for that person's use, and that includes hospitals. Hospitals are receiving equipment and using that equipment. So the people who supply that equipment, if it fits within the definition of ITT and AV, then the suppliers, the producer, based on the definition of producer who supplied that equipment to the hospital, has to report that supply. The hospital itself is the consumer and not the producer. So this Act applies to producers and the obligation of producers to report what they supply to consumers. And those consumers can be industrial, institutional, hospitals, it doesn't matter, individuals, businesses, all of those are consumers. And so all of the supply to those consumers is reportable by the producers responsible for that supply.
Great, thank you. This is just a confirmation on one of the, again, one of the earlier slides. Want to confirm what was said for printer cartridges. Reporting only needs to be done for the cartridge itself and not including the ink.
That's right. The toner and the ink does not have to be reported. It's a consumable. And if you were to report that weight, it would, of course, increase the management requirement, the amount that has to be recovered. And of course, you can't recover something that's been consumed. And so the focus is basically on the electronic component of that product, which is the cartridge itself, rather than but without the consumable contained in it.
Okay, great. I think that's it for this section. We can move on to the producer section.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, so we're going to talk a little about who a producer is, based on the question that we just got a couple of minutes ago. And so essentially, a person is considered to be an ITTIAV producer if that person supplies ITTIAV into Ontario to consumers in Ontario. And we start with the brand holder. If there's a brand holder who's resident in Canada, then that brand holder who markets to consumers in Ontario is responsible for reporting what was marketed to consumers in Ontario. If there is no resident in Canada brand holder, then the resident importer in Ontario who receives those products and markets them to consumers in Ontario becomes the producer for the purposes of those products. And if there is no resident importer, then the person resident in Ontario who markets those electronics to consumers in Ontario becomes the producer. And then if there's no resident marketer, then the non-resident marketer becomes responsible. So it's a hierarchy that starts with the brand holder, and it's based on residency until you run out of somebody who's not resident, and then the last category is the non-resident marketer. So what is a brand holder? So a brand is any mark or word or name, symbol, etc., or combination that includes registered and unregistered trademarks that identifies a product and distinguishes it from other products. So so if you have a computer that has the Dell brand on it, or versus the Apple brand on it, versus the Samsung brand on it, those are those are brands of computers, and obviously they distinguish individual products from one another based on that brand. So the brand holder is the person who owns or licenses the brand and otherwise has the rights to market that product under the brand. And if there's two or more brand holders, then the producer who's most directly connected to the production of the E is the brand holder for the purposes of the regulation. If more than one item of electronics is produced by different brand holders and marketed in a single package, the producer who's most directly connected to the primary product in the package is the brand holder. So, as an example, if I was a brand holder for a particular brand of laptop, and I sold that laptop, but I bundled it with a keyboard that's made by somebody else and a mouse that's made by somebody else. The primary product, of course, is the laptop, and the other two things are peripherals. So as the brand holder of the laptop, I would be responsible for everything in the package, including what was bundled from other producers. This is similar to how the tires regulation works in practice. We have tire manufacturers, tire brand holders who distribute tires and market them directly to consumers in Ontario. But the other way that new tires come into Ontario is they come with new cars. And the people who are selling the cars into Ontario are responsible for reporting the tires that come with those cars. So it's the same kind of concept here. An example of where you might have two or more brand holders on a particular product. If you, for example, had a battery that had two brand marks on it, maybe just as an example, I don't know if this is a real thing or not, but you had Duracell or Energizer named on the battery, but also you had a retailer's name on that, Metro or Staples or whatever. In that context, with the two brands that are on that, obviously the one that's most closely connected to the battery is the actual battery manufacturer, the Duracell or Energizer, versus the retailer. So I don't know how often that happens, but that was the idea behind the requirement that the producer most directly connected to the production of the electronics is the brand holder. Obviously, the retailer is not producing the battery in that example. The producer, the Duracell, the Energizer, whomever is more closely connected to the production of that battery. So, questions to consider of whether your company is an obligated producer. Consider the following questions: is my company the brand holder for the parts we supply? If yes, does my company have residency in Canada? If the answer is yes to both of those questions, then you're the obligated producer for all of those products. Does my company import any of the products we supply from outside of Ontario, and for which there's no resident brand holder in Canada? So if the brand holder is resident in Canada, they're obligated. If they're not, then as an importer and you're resident in Ontario, then you become the obligated producer for those products. Does my company market products directly to consumers in Ontario? So where there's no resident importer, but you are resident in Ontario and you're marketing directly to a consumer in Ontario, then you would become the obligated producer for those products. And this is true even if your company doesn't have residency in Ontario. That's that fourth category where there's no marketer resident in Ontario. There are some producer exemptions. So if before any reductions that might apply to your supply data, your management requirements less than 3.5 tons, then you will be exempt from the following things. You don't have to register and report to the authority. You don't have to establish a collection and management system, and you don't have to engage in any promotion or education requirements. It's important to note that the management percentage requirement increases each year, starting in 2023 through 2024 and 2025. So while you might be exempt in 2021 or 2022, you might not be exempt in subsequent years. So you do have to continue to pay attention to what you're supplying into Ontario and making sure if you're relying on an exemption, that exemption continues to exist. And if you're not required to register, there is still a requirement to retain records relating to what you supply into Ontario and to have them available to inspectors on request. Anybody who is uncertain about whether an exemption applies to them, again, I would encourage you to reach out to our compliance team and they'll be happy to assist you on that. So just by way to illustrate the points that I just made in the last slide, what does 3.5 tons of management requirement mean in terms of what you actually supplied into Ontario? So you'll see in this table that in 2021 and 2022, the management requirement is requirement to recover 55% of what you supplied into Ontario. So reverse engineering the math on that, if your management requirement is 3.5 tons, that translates out into 6.36 tons of actual supply. So if your supply is less than 6,360 kilograms, that means your management requirement is going to be less than 3.5 tons, and that means that you will be exempt from the requirements to register and report and perform. And as I indicated a minute ago, you'll see that in 2023, the 55% management requirement increases to 60%, and then in 2024 to 65%, and in 2025 to 70%. So you'll see that the amount that you have to supply to gain the exemption starts to go down. So you might have been, let's assume that you supplied 6,000 kilograms in 2021 and in 2022, you would be exempt. But if you supplied 6,000 kilograms in 2023, you would no longer be exempt because it's greater than what you see in the table here. And that number continues to reduce through to 2025. So that's what a producer is. Sorry, just a second. One of the things that the regulation provides for is something called a volunteer organization. A volunteer organization is a person that is a brand holder who isn't resident in Canada, and a non-resident brand holder is able to take over the responsibilities of the people who would otherwise be producers here in Ontario, and carry out all of the obligations of those producers on behalf of those producers. So far we haven't had any examples of this. It remains to be seen if we will. But essentially that non-resident brand holder, if they register with the authority and they have a written agreement with the producers, they can carry out all of the activities on behalf of those producers, and those producers don't have to register or report, as long as the volunteer organization carries on and makes sure and meets all of the requirements that those producers otherwise would have. So it's important to understand that in this context, you'd have a series of unregistered producers operating under an agreement, and as long as that volunteer organization meets the requirements of the regulation on behalf of those producers, they don't have to register and report. Of course, if anyone is interested in this arrangement, we're happy to work with that potential volunteer organization and the related producers if they want to pursue this to make sure that it can be implemented appropriately. So the regulation provides for something called producer agreements. Once a producer registers, they can enter into written agreements with one or more people to carry out the requirements that under the regulation. Essentially, these are service provider agreements. So there's producer responsibility organizations and processors and refurbishers, and producers have the ability to enter into agreements with service providers, and the service providers then will carry out the activities that producers require in order to meet producer obligations under the regulation. This includes supply data reporting and payment of fees, to the extent that that arrangement is in place with a service provider. And as long as the producer has an agreement with somebody who's actually doing what the producer is required to do, then the producer itself is relieved from having to do those, unless the person under the contract fails to deliver, in which case the obligated producer remains responsible. The obligated producer always has to register in this context, and ultimately, as the section in the section 6 of the regulation says, that registered producer is always obligated to meet the requirements under the regulation. Now we're aware that in the existing OES program, there was a system in place that was based on something called remitter agreements, which allowed retailers to report what they sold of various producers' products, the number of units that they sold to OES. That's not really something that's available under this new regulation, because the requirement under the new regulation is that a producer must report their total supply weight that they provide to Ontario. And of course, a remitter doesn't have the ability to do that. And there's no way for us as a regulator to keep track of what individual partial reports might provide to us. We don't know when the total amount is being reported. Only the producer can know that. So as long as the total number is reported by somebody under an agreement, this works. It doesn't have to be the producer. The producer can engage the services of someone else to collect all of that information and report it on their behalf, and that works fine. Each producer has the ability to authorize users in their account to report what has to be reported. And as I said, ultimately, the producer is responsible for ensuring that their total weight is reported either directly by them or by someone else on their behalf. Visible fees, how do they work under the regulation? So under this regulation, there are no requirements relating to visible fees or environmental handling fees or eco fees or all of the things that these have been referred to in various contexts. The key thing for a producer to understand is that resource recovery fees are not mandatory. So if a retailer is recovering separate fees from a consumer, it's really, really important that retailer understands that that if a consumer wants to know what that fee is about, that the explanation cannot be that this is a mandatory requirement that the consumer has to pay, because that's simply not true. Resource recovery fees are just a way of separating out some of the cost of the product that the producer is responsible for. The producers are responsible for the entire life cycle of their products, and of course they will incur some costs associated with the collecting and recycling of their products when a consumer is finished. It's up to the producer to determine if they want to choose to charge a visible fee on their products when they supply them into Ontario. It's up to retailers to decide if they want to pass visible fees on to their consumers. It's up to retailers to decide if they to work with their producers, with their suppliers, about whether, in fact, they want to have separate visible fees when they receive products from their suppliers. All of which takes you down to the bottom line, which is there's no requirement for retailers to charge resource recovery fees, and there's no ability for producers to require retailers to do it. Any fee that's charged for resource recovery that's set for by the producer of that product has to be for that purpose, and it has to relate to that actual product. If you're not the producer of a product and are not being passed down a visible fee, you shouldn't be charging a fee for the collection and recycling of ITTIAV. Only obligated producers should be adding anything to a product. And ultimately, if a business chooses to charge a visible fee, the fee can't be called a tax. So we're giving you all of these messages because these are things that we have seen in the past in the marketplace, and essentially they put both producers and retailers at risk when these things happen. The explanation that a fee is mandatory puts you at risk. The explanation that a fee is a tax puts you at risk. The explanation that a fee is required because of an Ontario program puts you at risk. And it puts you at risk at two different levels. So the Competition Bureau may be very interested in looking at it. And of course, Consumer Protection Ontario may be very interested in looking at it as well. Because ultimately, consumers should not be misled as to why they're being asked to pay something, and they shouldn't be asked to pay something that isn't real. All right, I'm going to stop there for questions.
Great. Yes, we have a lot of questions. Again, I'll just emphasize again that due to the number of questions, it is likely that we will not get to all of them during today's session, but we will follow up with you directly after the webinar, in the following days via email. So please understand that. Also, if you did ask a question earlier, we're sometimes holding off on some of them until they kind of relate to the relevant section. So if you're asking a question about reporting or registration, for example, that's our next section. So we'll either answer your question in those slides or respond to them at the end of that section. We're just trying to kind of group them all together. So first question for you here, Pat, is where is the definition of resident in Canada?
It's in the income tax regulations, under the Federal Income Tax Act. And it basically is if you have a building, a presence in Canada. Again, this is something that you should get legal advice on. The definition of resident is set out in the regulation. I'm just going to quickly follow it up here. So resident in Canada means a person having a permanent establishment in Canada, and resident in Ontario means a person having a permanent establishment in Ontario. So that's what it comes down to. Do you have a permanent establishment in Ontario or in Canada? And if you do, then you're resident in Canada or Ontario, as the case may be.
Okay, great. Can you confirm the following? We purchase from a brand owner that has a permanent establishment in Canada. They ship the product to another province, and after that, we ship it into Ontario. Is the brand owner the responsible party?
Sorry, if you could just repeat the question again.
Yeah. We purchase from a brand owner that has a permanent establishment in Canada. They ship the product to another province, and after that, we ship it into Ontario. Is the brand owner in the situation the responsible party under the regulation?
Yes, in that hypothetical, the brand owner is resident in Ontario, in Canada, has a permanent establishment based on what that means, and the brand holder's products are being marketed to consumers in Ontario, so they are the producer for that product. Great.
This question is more so related to the previous section, but thought it was still relevant. So we spoke to kind of those charging cords or things being sold separately as obligated. Would an extension cord be obligated under the regulation?
So a simple extension cord is just a piece of wire and can be used for any purpose. Again, you have to go back to the definition of ITT and AV. The primary purpose of the product as defined for ITT and AV, and includes peripherals for that purpose. So if a charging cable is a peripheral for a piece of equipment that falls within the definition ITT and AV, which includes a rechargeable battery, and you get the power cord that goes with that, yeah, that's all part of the ITT and AV. A simple extension cord on its own, which can be used to, plug in a light or plug in anything, as opposed to what might be IT and AV, doesn't make it ITT and AV.
Great, thank you. Next question here: are we restricted to only recycling our products, or can we recycle other products under the E-Reg to meet the target weight?
Right. So the way it works is, as a producer, you report what you supplied into Ontario. Based on the weight of what you supplied it into Ontario, there's a calculation that says that you have to recover at least 55% of that weight in the form of resource recovery. And that 55% recovery rate is based on any of the ITT and AV that gets collected in Ontario. It's not limited to your brands. There's no practical way to track your own brands in the context of a collection system picking up waste electronics across the province. So it's a kilogram-based requirement. If you put in 100 kilograms of supply, you have to recover 55 kilograms of waste electronics. Nothing to do with your brand.
Great, thank you. Again, we have a number of questions here, but I think we'll move to the next section. There are a number that are related to registration and reporting. So maybe we'll speak to that and answer those questions in the next section.
All right. We're going to talk a little bit about registration and reporting. The regulation set a November 30th deadline for reporting, but we recognize that with the late delivery of the regulation in relation to that reporting deadline, that it was going to be very, very difficult for producers to meet that reporting deadline. So we've extended the registration date to the end of January of next year to give producers enough time to determine what their 2018 supply weight was, so that they can report that in and understand what their performance obligation is. The other impact of the late delivery of the regulation was, of course, until the regulation was issued, we weren't in a position to understand publicly what was required for building the electronic registry. And so we don't have an electronic registry available for this round of reporting. We will be building that in the course of 2021. So in the meantime, we're using a spreadsheet-based form to allow people to register and report their 2018 supply data, and along with information that relating to post-consumer recycled content, warranties, and repair options. That data will be migrated into the registry when it's built, and basically the plan is that producers will receive a link to the new account in the electronic registry that they can follow, and then set up passwords and manage their account and confirm their data as reported in the spreadsheet is accurately reported in their electronic account as well. But all of that is to try to make this transition as smooth as possible, recognizing the pressure that everybody's under for a number of reasons. First, the tight timing of the release of the regulation itself, and of course, having to manage the impacts of COVID, et cetera, on everybody's businesses. So the registration form is available on our website. You can download it there and follow the instructions in that form, and then submit it to registry at rpra.ca. It's pretty straightforward. The heavy lifting, of course, will be for each producer to determine the weight of its 2018 supply, and once you've determined that, then it's just a question of entering those numbers in the spreadsheet and submitting it to us. There are registry fees, of course, to cover the cost of operating the authority and building the registry, et cetera. The way it's going to work with the spreadsheet form is once you've submitted the spreadsheet to us, somebody on our end will review it, and then an invoice will be issued. The invoices are payable on 30 days from issuance, and the fee is based on the recently approved fees that the authority approved in October. It's 3.4 cents a kilogram for E supplied in 2018 for everybody who supplied more than 6,500 kilograms. If you supplied less than 6,500 kilograms, there's no fee. So you have to report what you supplied into Ontario to consumers, and it's considered supplied when it's marketed into Ontario, meaning that it's been sold or distributed or leased or rented to someone in Ontario. So ITTIAV that is imported into Ontario is not necessarily supplied into Ontario until it's actually been marketed. And this is the situation where somebody might deliver ITTIAV products to a distribution center that happens to be in Ontario, but then half of those products end up being sent to Manitoba or British Columbia or Quebec. Clearly, they haven't been supplied into Ontario. They just came into Ontario briefly and then left Ontario. That is not required to be reported to the authority. Only the ITTIAV that remains in Ontario and used by a consumer in Ontario has to be reported. As I indicated earlier, ITTIAV is supplied into all sectors of the Ontario economy, and regardless of what sector of the Ontario economy it's still obligated. So residential consumers, business consumers, hospital consumers, institutional consumers, commercial consumers, industrial consumers, they're all consumers of electronics, and the producers of those of the ITTIAV that's supplied to those consumers, marketed to those consumers, must be reported by the producers for those products. It's also important to note that ITTIAV that is supplied under a warranty claim is part of the supply into Ontario to a consumer, and therefore must be included in supply reporting. So if you're a cell phone manufacturer, for example, or a cell phone producer, and you have a warranty on the battery, and which is part of the ITTIAV, and you replace that battery, the weight of that replacement battery that you supply to meet people claiming against the warranty is part of the supply in that year. So you have to report that as being supplied into Ontario. If it's leased to someone in Ontario, clearly supplied to someone in Ontario, even if the product is taken back by the producer at the end of life of that product, it's still reported as supplied, and therefore must be reported by the producer as supply. Supply data is used to determine what your performance obligation is as a producer. So the weight of a percentage of the weight that you supply is your performance requirement. As I touched on briefly a few minutes ago, in 2021, if you have to recover 55% of the weight of what you supplied into Ontario, making best efforts to do that. The same in 2022. That goes up to 60% in 2023, 65% in 2024, and 70% in 2025. And as you see, you started off in 2021 reporting your 2018 data to set your requirement for 2021. In 2022, you will add your 2019 data, supply data, and then it's averaged and multiplied by the percentage. In 2023, you will report your 2020 supply data, and then it's a rolling average of 3 years of supply data from that point onwards, with the increasing percentage from 60 to 65 to 70, and then it stays at 70 after that, unless there's a subsequent change to the regulation. So your management requirement will then determine if you're exempt from any obligations under the regulation. If this formula brings you under 3.5 tons or 3,500 kilograms, then you're exempt. But it otherwise determines the minimum weight of ITT and AV that you're required to manage or recover through the process of collection and recycling and refurbishment in Ontario. It's really important to keep in mind that this is not a quota. This is a minimum requirement. The collection system has to operate all year round, and everything that gets collected has to be processed. If you had a performance requirement of 100 tons and you reached 100 tons of performance in September, you can't stop. The collection system continues to operate, and everything that gets collected in the collection system has to be processed and then reported as performance. So again, important to remember, these are minimum requirements. The only other thing I will say is that for 2021 and 2022, the requirement to meet the 55% is on a best efforts basis. This is an enforceable standard. You can't sit back and do nothing. You do have to make all reasonable efforts to make sure that you can recover at least 55% of what you supplied into Ontario. When you're talking to your service providers, you have to exercise, of course, appropriate due diligence to ensure that you're contracting with on a reasonable basis to ensure that you can meet your requirements. And as I say, the requirement doesn't end when you hit the 55% mark. It's a continuing requirement throughout the course of the year, a minimum requirement. The next couple of slides are basically touching on how to go about determining what your supply weight was in 2018. The challenge, of course, for producers in the OES program was that they never had to report weight. They only reported units. And of course, we need to have weight reported because there's no other way to measure performance except on the basis of weight, at least no other reasonable way to do it. So given that you're required to report the total weight of the ITTIAV that you market into Ontario, you have to start with knowing how many units were marketed into Ontario in 2018, and then you have to know what the unit weight is in order to come up with the total weight. So starting with how to determine how many units were marketed into Ontario in 2018, you've got a couple of options as a producer. If you know the actual units of what you marketed into Ontario, then obviously you can use the actual units. An alternative approach is set out in the regulation and under the regulation, and that allows you to use a formula to calculate the number of units you might have supplied into Ontario. And it's based on the ratio of the population of Ontario against the total population of all of the provinces and territories in which you supplied your ITT and AV, and based on Statistics Canada information. So if you know what your national sales are in Canada, and then using the Statistics Canada population for Ontario and the Statistics Canada information about the population of the provinces and territories that you actually sold in, you can use this formula to determine the number of units that you supplied into Ontario. So that gets you the number of units, and then the next thing is, well, how do you convert that to weight? Again, you can use the actual weight if you know what it is, and these days people do understand what the specs are for their products, and you just take the number of units and multiply it by the unit weight, and you get your actual weight. The alternative is to use calculated weight using the weight conversion calculator that's set out in our verification and audit registry procedure. We don't have weight conversion factors for every product, and so if you don't see a weight conversion factor for your product, then you should use the actual weight. A third option is to, knowing that some material comes in packaging, and the producer knows what the total weight is of the product and the packaging, you can use a packaging factor to determine what your weight is. Again, there is an obligation to provide accurate data, so you can't just make up a packaging factor. It's got to be based on something that's reasonable, and if you're planning to use that method, I would encourage you to contact the compliance team to talk about what your approach looks like. And then, of course, you can, if you have other methodologies that you want to bring to us to look at in order to determine how to report the weight of what you supplied into Ontario, we're happy to look at different methodologies that you might have and determine whether they're a reasonable approach or not. One of the things that you can do as part of reporting your supply weights is you can reduce that supply weight, which of course then reduces your management requirement. And there's three different ways that you can reduce your supply weight. If your product contains post-consumer recycled glass or plastic, you can reduce the supply weight by the weight of that post-consumer recycled glass or plastic in your product. And of course, if your product comes with batteries and there's post-consumer recycled content in the batteries, you can also use that post-consumer recycled content to reduce your supply weight. You can also reduce your supply weight if you offer a manufacturer's warranty, and I'm going to look at each of these individually in a bit more detail. And then finally, you can also make available information, tools, and parts to repair the ITTIAV. And again, there's some rules around how you can use that to reduce your supply weight. The cumulative maximum that you can reduce your supply weight is 50%, and it has to be verified in accordance with the EE verification and audit registry procedure, which is published on our website and incorporated by reference in the regulation. You don't have to verify these reductions for the weight that you report in 2020 and 2021. Important to keep in mind, however, that it doesn't reduce your obligation to report accurate data, and it doesn't limit the ability of a compliance officer to review the data and related records for the purpose of ensuring compliance. All right, so let's talk a little bit about post-consumer recycled content. So this is material that was recovered from products or packaging that had previously been used by consumers. Only post-consumer glass or plastic contained in the ITTIAV and post-consumer recycled content in the batteries supplied in or with the ITTIAV can count towards a reduction to a producer's management requirement. Producers that use the post-consumer recycled content in their products can reduce their supply weight by the weight of that recycled content. So, for example, if you're a producer of TVs and each television that you supply into Ontario contains 0.02 kilograms of post-consumer recycled plastic or glass, and you supplied 1,000 of those, you can reduce your supply data by 20 kilograms. So it's a one-for-one reduction up to a maximum of 50%. On a cumulative basis across all of the reduction requirements. So the second category that allows you to reduce your supply weight is based on whether you offer a manufacturer's warranty. So this is a warranty that covers the ongoing functionality of the equipment for at least 1 year beyond the first year after the purchase date. And it must be provided to the consumer at no additional charge to qualify. So you can reduce the supply weight of your ITTIAV covered by such a warranty by 5% for each full calendar year that warranty is provided for beyond the first year after purchase. So by way of example, if you're reporting your 2018 supply data, which is what you're required to do this year, if that supply came with a warranty for 1 year beyond the first year after the date of purchase, the weight of that supply can be reduced by 5%. If that supply came with a warranty for 2 years beyond the first year, the weight of that supply to report it can be reduced by 10%. If that supply came with a warranty that was only 90 days beyond the first year, there's no reduction available. It has to be a full calendar year. So for each full calendar year that you have that extended warranty beyond year 1, you can reduce your supply weight by 5%, but only for the product that the warranty applies to. It's not all of your supply weight, only the weight of the supply that's subject to the warranty itself. And to the extent that you claim this and post-consumer recycled content and any of the others, there's a cumulative maximum of 50% reduction. The last category that allows you to reduce your supply weight is based on repair. So if you provide information regarding repair and you make it available to the consumer at no charge, and you have tools and parts that are available at no charge or on a cost recovery basis, and it's available at the time that you're reporting that supply data. So if you're reporting 2018 supply data in 2020, now extended to January 31st of 2021, the the information and parts have to be available at that time. So you have to ensure that if you're going to claim this reduction, that this information and these parts were available at the time in the year that you're reporting the supply data. So 2018 supply data being reported in 2020 means that the information and parts and tools have to be available in 2020 at the time you're reporting that 2018 supply data. And you can then reduce the supply weight of those products for which you're providing information, parts, or tools by 10%. I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Great. First question here. Are warranty replacement parts included in reporting?
Yes, I think I touched on that a while ago. And so the replacement parts that are provided to somebody who's claiming under a warranty are part of the supply that has to be reported in the year that those parts were provided under the warranty. So if I bring my cell phone in this year in 2020 to get a battery replaced because I have a warranty, then that replacement battery is part of 2020's supply data, which will be reported when 2020 data is required to be reported 2 years from now.
Great, thank you. Question here, can a pro register with RPRA on behalf of the producer?
No, the regulation makes it clear that every producer has to register, and then a producer has the ability to enter into agreements with service providers like pros to carry out the producer's responsibilities under the regulation. So, and ultimately, this is largely focused on the performance requirements, setting up the collection system, setting up the management system, making sure that electronics are being collected in order to meet the producer's obligation under the regulation.
Thank you. Are refurbished products sold into Ontario also obligated? Under OES, only new products are obligated.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Sure. Are refurnished products that are sold into Ontario obligated under the new regulation? Under OES, only new products are obligated.
Mm-hmm. The regulation requires you to report the supply of new products. Refurbishment is a form of resource recovery and can count towards the weight of the refurbished products can count towards the performance requirements that the producer has, and the refurbished products are not reportable as new supply.
Other question here. We have a take-back program where we get old products back when they are obsolete. How is this accounted for, or is this accounted for under the new regulation?
So the supply of those products, you would report, as a producer, you report, I supplied X kilograms of these products, and then you have a performance obligation. And then if you take back those products, and that will meet some of the collection requirements that you have, and then based on what you do with those products that you've taken back, the weight of what happens to those those products that are taken back may be countable towards your performance. So if you take back your product and send it all off to a processor or get it refurbished so that it can be used again, then the weight of that product that you took back and had processed, the resources are recovered from the processing, or the weight of the product that was refurbished and reused can count towards your performance obligation.
Great, thank you. 1 second. So question here. If a product line is no longer sold anymore, but was sold in 2018 and OES was paid for, so it is not fair to artificially inflate the weight target if that product was included in the reported 2018 numbers. Do you want me to repeat that?
I think I understand the question. So this is a question that comes up in different ways, where people have a view that by reporting 2018 supply data to us in 2020 to set a performance requirement in 2021, that somehow you're reporting the same thing twice and paying for the same thing twice. And that's not how the regulation works. Supply data that you based on the weight of the supply in 2018 is just the formula that's used to set a performance obligation that you have to meet in 2021. It doesn't have anything to do with whether the product was discontinued in 2018 or 2019. You supplied this equipment, this weight in 2018, and based on the weight that you supplied in 2018 multiplied by 55%, that's what you have to recover in 2021. You're not recovering your products, you're recovering waste electronics up to a minimum requirement of 55% of the weight that you reported having supplied in 2018. And that just becomes a rolling average. It's just a formula for saying, I'm a producer, I'm supplying stuff into Ontario, that supply I report in on a historical basis year after year, and it's averaged out to set a performance requirement that is clearly less than 100%. It starts at 55%.
Thanks, Pat. I'll ask one more question here and then move on to the section on pros. If a brand owner is in a different province and the retailers bring products into Ontario and the brand owner refuses to register with RPRA, is there a recourse against retailers?
So basically, the regulation imposes requirements on producers, and producer is a defined term. And if there's a brand owner resident in Canada, then that producer is obligated and responsible for reporting the products that are supplied into Ontario and for meeting the management requirement based on what they're supplying into Ontario. So it's producer obligation.
Thanks, Pat. We'll move to the next section now.
So we're going to talk a little bit about working with pros and other service providers. So as producers, you have mandatory collection and management requirements, and they're enforceable against you as a producer. You have some clear choices. You can meet these management requirements yourself, or you can hire a pro to do it for you, or you can contract directly with service providers. So you can contract with haulers, you can contract with refurbishers, you can contract with processors, and then report your performance based on those contracts. Or you can hire a pro to do it for you, and the pro will contract with haulers and refurbishers and processors and report performance on your behalf. All of which is these are the options that you have. Based on the most likely scenario, producers are likely primarily to contract with pros to meet their obligations under the regulation, and of course they may choose to contract with other service providers instead of pros. We, as of today, we now have 9 pros registered in Ontario. So producers have a lot of options to look at to meet their obligations and to ensure that they're taking advantage of the competitive marketplace that exists now for meeting producer obligations. So some of you may have received communications about how OES is rebranding to become EPRA and so on. But it's really, really important to understand that that's not actually the case. OES is completely shutting down and can be completely wound up, and then there will be pros competing with one another in the marketplace for producer business and competing to meet producer obligations. So keep in mind that this is a significant paradigm shift. It's not the old program, and the new program does not look like the old program and can't be made to look like the old program because it's based on individual producer responsibility in a way that the old program never was. It's important that producers understand that they have collection and management systems in place to begin meeting their obligations by January 1st of 2021. And because you have to hit the ground running, and collection has to be happening. The regulation makes it clear that that consumers of ITT and AV have to have the ability to drop off used ITT and AV starting January 1st across Ontario. No matter where those consumers live, they have to be able to drop off and have their waste electronics collected and then brought in for processing. So producers or pros on their behalf have to report the collection sites that make up the collection system, and the haulers, processors, refurbishers, battery haulers, battery processors, and battery refurbishers to make up their management system by April 30th of next year. And this is our touch base to make sure that the collection management systems are up and running and the way they should be, hopefully already well underway by January 1st of 2021. When you're entering into contracts, you make sure that you're recognizing the fact that your performance obligations are minimum requirements, not a quota, and make sure you understand how your pro or your service provider is going to meet those minimum requirements and what it means for those processes to continue through the full year. Because as I indicated, consumers have the right to drop off used electronics equipment through the entire year, and everything that gets dropped off has to be processed and reported as performance. So you're going to ask yourself whether your company needs a pro or a service provider or other service provider. So it starts with figuring out what your requirements are under the regulation. How much ITT and AV does my company need to collect and manage in Ontario, i.e., what's my management requirement based on what I supplied into Ontario? Am I a small producer or a large producer for the purposes of the collection system requirements? Excuse me. Can my company meet the obligations without the service of a pro? What actions can my company take to collect and recycle or refurbish ITT and AV in Ontario? What commercial arrangements do I have or do I need with service providers? What actions will my company take with regard to the promotion and education requirements under the regulation? This is the requirement to let consumers know that there is a collection system and a management system available and where people can drop off electronics and how they might be otherwise collected based on the regulation. Do I need to contract with a pro? If I have obligations that I can't meet myself without the service of a pro, then yeah, I might need to contract with a pro. And what pro can help me meet those obligations under the regulation? We're sure that more than 90% of producers are going to determine that they need the services of a pro or other service provider to meet the requirements. And so then you have to look at what's being offered. And as I say, there are 9 pros now making offerings in the Ontario marketplace. So take the opportunity to see what's out there and in order to make the best decision for you as a company, as a producer. If you go to our website, you will find everybody who's currently registered is listed there. So pros are, the list of pros is registered, that are registered or is available on our website, along with haulers, processors, and refurbishers. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, a couple questions here, and we've seen a lot of similar questions come in about this one, so hopefully this will capture a lot of people's inquiries. So if the resource recovery or the management requirement is exceeded in the first year, can the excess be used to make up any shortfall in year 2?
No, all of the performance that happens in the performance year is reported for that year. There's no carryover allowed. So if you hit 60% instead of 55%, you report 60%. There's no ability to carry over to subsequent years.
Great. Next question here. Again, quite a few questions on this. What if a pro doesn't meet the producer's obligations? Is the producer then responsible? How will that be managed?
So fundamentally, the producer is always responsible, and so it's critical that the producer understands the nature of the relationship it's entering into with a pro, and to satisfy itself that the pro has the ability to meet their obligations, and obviously to set up a contract that has that is based on due diligence, and to manage that contract like you would with any other supplier, regardless of who the supplier is. In this case, it's a service provider who's going to provide you with performance, but you have to manage these contracts like every contract that as a business you would be managing. The producer remains on the hook always for meeting those requirements. You can contract with more than one pro. You can contract with the pro at any time during the course of the year. So if you're with pro number one and you're getting worried because based on monitoring the performance of that pro that might not meet your requirements, you're free to go to the market and contract with other pros who may be able to meet your obligations. So it all comes down to due diligence and taking all the reasonable steps that you're required to meet under the best efforts standard for the first couple of years. And then with experience, of course, going past the first couple of years, you'll be able to do this obviously more easily with time and experience. It really comes down to just making sure that if you have a significant performance requirement, and you have people bid on it, that you enter into contracts that will work for you. Obviously, there's commercial consequences for breach of contract, which has nothing to do with us. We always look to the producer for compliance.
Thanks, Pat. Next question. How do you intend to make it a level playing field with e-sales?
So this is the question, I guess, relating to internet sales. And obviously, we know that there's some very large internet sales players, and we're obviously working with them to make sure that they meet their obligations under the regulation. And we will be looking at the issue of free riders very, very closely, as we did with tires. We had good success with catching free riders in tires, and we're going to build on. We're going to build on that success for batteries and electronics and all the subsequent materials as well. We certainly recognize that there are aspects of internet sales that provide some challenge to producer responsibility regimes, not just in Ontario, but in every jurisdiction that has this. But we are very focused on making sure that we limit that as much as possible.
Thanks, Pat. As I mentioned, I think we'll just quickly jump to, we're going to jump to the poll here just to get your feedback on our webinars. We have a couple final slides, and then we can have time for a couple more questions at the end. So again, this is voluntary, but we do highly value your feedback and input as they help to, again, improve our webinars and events going forward. So you should see 4 questions pop up on your screen. They should all be in gray boxes. So again, feel free to answer those questions. I'll just give 30 seconds to a minute here, and then we'll move on. Okay, great. I'll just give you a couple more seconds and then I'll finish. All right, thank you so much for participating in the poll. Again, this is extremely helpful as we continue to improve upon our consultations and webinars and events going forward. So thank you again. So Pat, I'll just pass it back over to you for the last 2 slides.
Okay. While you were doing that, I was looking at some of the other questions, and I might just answer a couple of them on the go here. So a question regarding replacement batteries, aren't they covered under the battery program and not the E program? Yes, that is true. The batteries that come with ITT and AV when it's being marketed to people in Ontario are included in ITT and AV. The replacement batteries are covered under the battery regulation and reportable under that regulation. Absolutely. The quantity of 6,500 kilograms per product, or the sum of the products sold in 2018. The 6,500 kilograms is the total weight of what was supplied in 2018, not on a per product basis. So if your total is more than 6,500 kilograms, then you will pay a fee at 3.4 cents per kilogram on the total amount that you supplied in 2018, if that amount exceeds 6,500 kilograms. All right, so quick recap. So understanding your requirements, consider the following questions and in determining what you have to do under the E regulation. Do I supply ITTIAV equipment into Ontario? So look at the definition, look at the schedule, look at the exemptions of products, and then talk to our compliance team if you have a question about a specific product. Are any of those products that I supply into Ontario obligated? Yep. Again, did they get marketed to an end user in Ontario, regardless of the sector that end user is in, hospitals, institutions, businesses, individuals, et cetera, et cetera. So as long as it went to an end user in Ontario, then that's obligated. Do I meet the definition of a producer? Am I a brand holder? Am I the importer resident in Ontario? Am I the marketer resident in Ontario? Or am I a non-resident marketer to Ontario? Am I exempt from registering and reporting? Yeah, calculate my performance requirement. And if my performance requirement is less than 3.5 tons, then I have an exemption. If I want to make sure that I understand how the exemption works, again, feel free to call the compliance team and they'll be happy to help you. What are my collection and management requirements? It's based on the formulas that are set out in the regulation. Your 2018 supply data is the starting point for 2021 performance requirement. Your supply data multiplied by 55% is your minimum performance requirement, and you also have collection system requirements based on whether you're a large producer or a small producer. If you're a large producer, you're looking at municipal population-based systems to make sure that every consumer end user in Ontario has access to a collection system. Do I need to work with Pro to meet my requirements? More likely than not, you will, and just make sure that you do your due diligence entering into agreements with pros and service providers, because you remain on the hook for the legal obligations under the regulation. So our compliance team is happy to help you on any and all of your questions, and please feel free to reach out at any time for any questions that you might have. This is the information, the contact information. It's also available on our website, and you can get more information about the program itself also on our website. And please stay tuned for future learning events.
Pat, we're just about out of time, but I thought we could answer a couple more questions. Sure. One in particular was a bit of a follow-up to the question that was asked earlier about the responsibility of the producer versus the pros. So if a pro does fail in meeting the producer's responsibilities, what happens to a producer? Is there an audit, a fine, a penalty?
Right.
So how would the authority handle these situations?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there are consequences for non-compliance, and the authority has a number of tools available to use. So we have inspectors who can obviously inspect and determine if there is a compliance issue or not. If non-compliance is discovered as a result of inspections or as a result of what's registered and reported, and what the audits that producers are required to carry out covers, we can have conversations to convince people to come into compliance, and if that works, that's great. And then if we still have a non-compliance issue, we have the ability to issue compliance orders. We have the ability to issue administrative penalties, and we have the ability to carry out prosecutions as well. So compliance orders are enforceable instruments that require people to do what needs to be done to resolve a situation of non-compliance. And an administrative penalty is a penalty that is imposed for non-compliance. And it's important to keep in mind that the administrative penalty process involves a base penalty for the non-compliance event. And then we have the ability to add to that base penalty the economic advantage that was gained by the producer as a result of non-compliance, and in order to make sure that there's no incentive to fail to comply. So I think that's all I will say on that point. We follow a progressive approach that's aimed at ensuring compliance. We're not waiting to catch people out of compliance to take enforcement steps. We want to make sure that people understand what it is they need to do so that they can take the steps necessary to do what they need to do.
Thanks, Pat. Another question, can a producer recover the RPRA registry fee?
I always find this an interesting question. So the producers are obligated for the full life cycle cost of their products. So that starts with the design all the way through the manufacturing and the logistics to deliver and the recovery of waste electronics at the end. And you recover all of that cost when you sell your product. You know what your cost is, and you add a margin to it. So to the extent that RPRA's fee is a fee, same as taxes and all of that, or costs and input costs for your product. Of course, you're not going to sell your products at a loss in the context of a competitive market. So I don't think I'll say much more about that than that. The recovery of all of the costs associated with your product can be incorporated into the price of that product.
Thanks, Pat. And I'll ask one last question here. Again, for those who we didn't get to your questions, we will follow up with you after. And thanks again for all of your great and engaging questions. But the last one here, if we sell E to a reseller company, not an end user in Ontario, should it be included in our supply data when reporting it?
If you fall within the definition of producer for that product, yes, it should be included in your supply data. I might be the brand holder, or I might be the importer resident in Ontario, but I might be importing it into Ontario and passing it on to other distributors who then pass it on to retailers who then sell it to a consumer. I'm still the producer for that product, no matter what chain happens below me. If I'm the person that imported in Ontario, or I'm the brand holder resident in Canada, I remain the producer for all of the products that end up is in end users' hands in Ontario.
Thank you, Pat. So again, we'll end it there, a couple minutes over. So thanks for those sticking to the very end. But thank you, everyone, for participating. Pat, any final words?
Well, just to thank very much everybody for attending on this. We certainly recognize that this is a big change, and change management is always a bit of a challenge for every business. And we want to be able to help you as much as we can and support your processes as much as we can. So we remain willing and able to take all of your questions and inquiries to help you get ready for this new program starting next year. So thank you very much.